In 1969, on a wind-scoured stretch of desert outside Durango, Sam Peckinpah came within a single decision of firing the most powerful star in Hollywood, and the 6 words he would later say about John Wayne would end whatever friendship they had left. But nobody on that set knew how close they were to watching a legend pack his bags for good. The cameras had just stopped rolling on Rio Diablo, a gritty revisionist western the studio hoped would merge old-school box office muscle with new-school brutality. When Peckinpah removed his sunglasses, walked past the stunned assistant director, and told Wayne in a low, controlled voice, "I don't think this is working anymore." And for a moment the only sound was the desert wind pushing against the boom mic, because Wayne, the Duke, the man whose silhouette alone could sell 1,000,000 tickets, did not blink, did not frown, did not raise his voice. He simply stared back as if he'd heard a stagehand complain about lunch. What the cast and crew didn't know was that the night before, after too many whiskeys and one too many arguments about how a hero should fall off a horse, Peckinpah had quietly placed a call to Robert Mitchum, testing the waters, asking in that half-casual, half-deadly serious tone whether he might be interested in stepping into a role if circumstances changed. Because to understand why this confrontation even happened, you have to go back several years to when Hollywood itself was changing in the ground beneath. Wayne's boots was no longer steady. Throughout the 1940s and 1950s, Wayne had defined the American Western in films like The Searchers and Rio Bravo, standing tall and unflinching, the embodiment of frontier certainty. But by the mid-1960s, audiences were restless. Vietnam was on the nightly news. Trust in institutions was cracking, and directors like Peckinpah were determined to strip the genre of its polish and show blood in slow motion. Men screaming when they were shot, heroes who hesitated and doubted and sometimes lost. Peckinpah had already detonated the old formula with The Wild Bunch, a film so violent and balletic it left critics arguing for months. And now he believed he could do something even more radical. Take the most iconic cowboy in cinema and force him to confront the death of his own myth on screen. Wayne, for his part, had agreed to the project not because he wanted deconstruction, but because he believed he could steer it, soften its edges, keep the moral center intact. And at first the partnership seemed like a publicity dream, the old lion and the rebellious gunslinger of a director joining forces. But from the first week the differences were obvious. Peckinpah rewrote scenes overnight, added pauses where Wayne's character would falter, inserted moments where the hero failed to draw fast enough or showed fear in his eyes, and Wayne would listen patiently, script in hand, then say, "That's not how this man would stand." Because to Wayne character was posture, conviction, spine, and he had built a career on never letting the audience see him crack. Peckinpah saw that as the problem. He wanted cracks. He wanted dust on the armor. He wanted to watch Wayne's character realize that the West he believed in was gone. And when Wayne delivered a take that felt too resolute, too Duke, Peckinpah would call cut and ask for less swagger, less certainty, more doubt. And the crew could feel the tension tightening like a rope between two horses pulling in opposite directions. Meanwhile, the studio executives hovered nervously, aware that Wayne's name on the poster guaranteed international sales, while Peckinpah's reputation guaranteed controversy. And the budget was climbing under the director's chaotic methods. Multiple cameras, endless retakes, explosive squibs rigged to go off in intricate patterns. And each delay made the possibility of replacing Wayne both unthinkable and terrifyingly practical. The breaking point came during a scene in which Wayne's character was supposed to hesitate before pulling the trigger on a former friend, a symbolic moment meant to show the erosion of certainty, and Wayne delivered the line cleanly, decisively, like a man who had already made peace with his choice, and Peckinpah stepped forward and said he wanted to see the hesitation, the flicker of regret, the humanity, and Wayne replied evenly that the man had already weighed that regret years ago, and what followed was not shouting but something colder, a disagreement about what the American hero should look like. In 1969, and when Peckinpah finally uttered, "I don't think this is working anymore," it wasn't just about a scene. It was about two philosophies colliding under a punishing sun. That night, rumors moved faster than the production trucks, whispers that Mitchum might arrive within days, that Wayne was too old for this new kind of Western, that Peckinpah wanted to make an example of Hollywood's biggest monument, and Wayne heard all of it without publicly reacting, because he had survived studio feuds before, political backlash, critical mockery, and he believed the audience ultimately decided who stayed and who vanished. Yet even he understood something fundamental had shifted, that for the first time a director wasn't simply asking him to play the Duke better, but was asking him to dismantle the Duke entirely. And as dawn broke over the Mexican hills and the crew prepared for another day of dust and gunfire, the question hanging over the set was no longer whether the film would be finished, but whether two men who represented opposite eras of the same genre could coexist long enough to get there. Because Peckinpah was determined to prove that even legends could bleed, and Wayne was equally determined to prove that legends didn't need to. By the third week of shooting, the tension between Sam Peckinpah and John Wayne had stopped being rumor and started becoming atmosphere. Something you could feel in the stillness before action, and in the way crew members suddenly found reasons to be elsewhere when the two men stood too close together. The film was moving forward, but barely, because Peckinpah still wanted to dismantle the myth of the American hero while Wayne was determined not to let that myth be buried on his watch. And every scene became a negotiation over what a man was allowed to show on screen in 1969. The breaking point came during a sequence where Wayne's character, wounded and outnumbered, was meant to hesitate before firing at a former friend, a moment Peckinpah described as the armor coming off. And the phrase alone was enough to tighten Wayne's expression, because from the Searchers to Rio Bravo, he had built a career on armor, on certainty, on moral clarity, on never letting the audience see him unsure. The first take was pure Duke, steady and unflinching even in pain, and Peckinpah immediately asked for more doubt, more visible conflict, something closer to the raw vulnerability he had forced out of his actors in The Wild Bunch. But each adjustment Wayne made felt minimal, controlled, as if he were willing to bend but not break, and after several retakes Peckinpah stepped forward, frustration overriding diplomacy, and said in front of cast and crew, "You're not a man anymore." 6. Words that landed harder than any shouted insult because they questioned not just the performance, but the persona. Wayne didn't explode, didn't argue. He simply looked at the director and replied, "You hired the Duke," a calm reminder that he was giving exactly what had made him a global star, and that if Peckinpah wanted something else he should have cast someone else. Production wrapped early that day, and by nightfall studio executives were calculating the unthinkable, whether replacing Wayne with someone like Robert Mitchum would salvage the director's vision or financially sink the film altogether. But cooler heads prevailed, contracts held firm, and the firing never came, though something far less reparable had already broken. From then on the collaboration turned clinical. Wayne hit his marks with quiet precision, offering no resistance yet no warmth, and Peckinpah limited his criticism to technical notes. The artistic debate replaced by professional distance, and ironically the performance that emerged carried subtle traces of the very vulnerability Peckinpah had demanded, a slower rise after a fall, a longer pause before a shot, moments critics would later praise as some of Wayne's most layered work. But the real fracture came after filming ended, when Peckinpah, in a candid interview comparing old Hollywood icons to rising method actors like Dustin Hoffman and Al Pacino, remarked, "John Wayne plays John Wayne," a comment that might have faded quietly if he hadn't added 6 sharper words, "with boots on or boots off," reducing the Duke's range to costume changes. And when the quote reached Wayne he offered no rebuttal, no public feud, only silence, the kind that settles permanently. And though the film succeeded, and both men continued shaping the Western in their own opposing ways, they never again shared more than a professional nod across crowded rooms. Because sometimes a career can survive creative warfare, but a friendship cannot survive 6 words, spoken when pride is already bleeding. In the years after the film's release, the silence between Sam Peckinpah and John Wayne became permanent, not explosive or dramatic, but cold and absolute, the kind of industry distance that says more than any public feud ever could. They continued to dominate conversations about the future of the Western, but from opposite philosophical corners. Peckinpah pushing further into moral ambiguity and operatic violence with films like Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, determined to show that the frontier was built on compromise and blood, while Wayne stood firm as the embodiment of a vanishing code, reinforcing his legacy with performances that reminded audiences why he had defined the genre for decades. culminating in his Academy Award winning turn in True Grit. The irony was impossible to ignore. Peckinpah wanted to prove the myth of the West was over, while Wayne's continued box office strength suggested audiences weren't ready to bury it. Yet the 6 words that had escaped in that interview, with boots on or boots off, echoed louder than either man expected, not because they derailed Wayne's career, which remained powerful, but because they crystallized a generational divide in Hollywood, reducing a titan to a symbol at the exact moment cinema was redefining what acting meant. Wayne never publicly retaliated, never offered a counterpunch in print or on television, and that restraint only amplified the narrative, because in an era when directors were becoming as famous as their stars, the idea that one of them had nearly fired the Duke and then dismissed his range in 6 casual words felt like a cultural turning point. When Wayne passed away in 1979, tributes poured in describing him as the face of American film, and even Peckinpah, never known for sentimentality, acknowledged privately that whatever their differences, Wayne had possessed something irreplaceable, a presence that filled the frame before he ever spoke a line. By then Peckinpah himself was battling studios, critics, and his own reputation, his uncompromising style admired but often contested. And perhaps he understood better than anyone how fragile creative alliances could be when ego and vision collided. In the end, the almost firing became Hollywood lore, the 6 words became shorthand for artistic tension, and the truth sat somewhere in between. Peckinpah had wanted to challenge a legend, to peel back the armor and reveal the man beneath, and Wayne had refused to let the myth be dismantled by anyone, not even a director bold enough to try. They had stood on the same dusty set chasing the same story, yet they represented different eras of the American psyche, one skeptical and self-questioning, the other resolute and unwavering. And once those worldviews clashed, no handshake could fully repair it. Sometimes careers survive confrontation, sometimes even benefit from it, but friendships, especially between giants, rarely do, and long after the box office numbers faded and the reviews yellowed with age, what remained was the image of 2 towering figures of cinema locked in a quiet standoff, proof that in Hollywood the most lasting battles aren't always fought with guns on screen, but with words spoken off it.